before we get started into the actual meat and potatoes of this segment of what I want to talk about, in the news, the Jets released three-time first-team All-Pro wide receiver Devontae Adams, saving a little cap space for next season. And Saquon Barkley becomes the highest-paid running back in NFL history after signing a 2-year, $41.2 million extension. 36 of that is guaranteed, and he can make up to $15 million extra on top of that in incentives and whatnot. Tee Higgins, 26 years old. He was drafted in the second round of the 2020 draft to the Cincinnati Bengals. Mm-hmm. He has been franchise tagged for the second consecutive year. Now, this is the 8th player in NFL history to be franchise tagged for more than 2 years in a row. Mm-hmm. So, in 2024, if y'all could tell by the thumbnail, he was franchise tagged for $20.6 million. Now, the rule is a player who is franchise tagged makes an average of the top 5 players' salary in that position.
Yes.
So they take the top 5 highest paid wide receivers, average it out, and that's how much Tee Higgins got paid in 2024. Now, in 2025, if a wide receiver, any position, not just wide receiver, you could – the average thing gets taken out of play because they've already met that requirement for the first year. The second year, they make 120% of the year prior if they are franchise tagged for a second year in a row. Now, this year, it is $26.2 million. That's what that 120% goes to. Now, let's talk about Tee Higgins last year. He only played 12 games, but let's see how good he played in those 12 games. So he had 73 receptions, and on those 73 receptions, he had just shy of 1,000 yards with 911 yards and a career-high 10 touchdowns, which also tied the team in highest. Jamar Chase had a lot more. It's his career high. So, usually, like I said, players that are franchise tagged in the second year, it's 120%. If you get to a third year, it becomes 144% of that first year salary. Okay? But that does not necessarily mean it has to be a consecutive third year. It just means that's the third time they have been franchised with the team. For example, Chris Godwin this year has the chance to be franchise tagged by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for the third season in his career. Yes, not consecutive. Before he signed his 3-year, $60 million contract extension, he had 2 franchise tags in a row prior to that. Now he's on his third. They don't know if they're going to rework a contract, give him an extension, and he can be franchise tagged. He probably won't be. We'll see what happens with that. Now, usually when these players get a consecutive franchise tag, they are signing long-term deals. Mm-hmm. Okay? 6 out of the 7 players who have been franchise tagged in recent history for consecutive years have signed a long-term deal. That's Chris Godwin back in 2022. He signed a 3-year deal. Dak Prescott in 2021, he signed another 4-year deal. Justin Simmons in 21, Leonard Williams in 21, and then DeMarcus Lawrence in 2019. He was the first ever to do it. So, Nate, does Tee Higgins reach a long-term deal? No. Why?
Because they got to pay, unless they're going to rework some deals, they still got to pay Jamar Chase. They still have to pay Jamar Chase, and he's about to break the bank. Tee Higgins is going to be, he's good trade bait. Somebody's going to be desperate enough for and want a receiver that has produced in the manner that Tee Higgins has produced. This is just one of those situations where he's on a team where you have 2 dogs on a receiver in Jamar Chase and Tee Higgins. Then you just have a up and rising star in Joe Burrow. Right now, it's not enough money to pay everybody. Somebody's going to get left out. Right now, Tee Higgins is going to get left out. And what they can do is trade and get some draft stock and get some draft capital for him. because somebody will trade for Tee Higgins.
For sure they will. I mean, he can come to New Orleans if he wants to, whatever money we have. I mean, I wouldn't mind him in the Crescent City. But Nate, I agree. You had $41 million in cap space. That is their calculated cap space. Of course, the cap space hasn't been set in stone yet for the next season, but that was what they were calculated to have. Tee Higgins has taken 26 million of it up.
Off the top.
Off the top, $26 million of it's allocated to Tee Higgins for 2025. There's a good chance that Tee Higgins becomes the second player to not sign a contract after being franchise tagged in consecutive seasons. But let's talk about this new rule, Nate. I've said before that if a player is tagged in 2 straight years, the team must pay 120% of the player's salary from the previous year, which is the average of the top five.
Top five
in that position, correct. So if they are tagged for a third year, that percentage is boosted to 144%. No more than 3 times can a player be franchise tagged in an organization. So, Nate, asking you as an ex-NFL DB, what's wrong with this? Was this, of course, you get the players involved. They come up with this rule in 2019. This is what happens. Is it holding players hostage in certain cities?
Oh, hands down.
Tee Higgins does not want to be in Cincinnati, Nate. He does not want to be there.
Hands down.
What's wrong with this new rule?
It's not right. It's not right. Like you said, it's holding players hostage. Players want to have the opportunity to test the market and see what their value and what their value and worth is and how it's viewed by other teams. But, the NFL is a business, and, this is the aspect of the business. It gets a little mucky, but this is holding him back. He wants to be able to sign a long-term deal where he's going to be compensated and appreciated. He's not getting that there. So he wants to be a number one.
And he has the capabilities to do it. In 12 games, Nate. There's 17 games played in the season. He had 911 yards in 12 games and a career-high 10 touchdowns in 12 games. He was productive this season. He was great for the Bengals. And now you're in a situation where the Bengals recognize that, but guess what? So do other teams. There's 32 teams in the NFL. If one of them can't afford a player as good as Tee Higgins, of Tee Higgins' caliber, one of the other 31 can. He's going to go somewhere where he's appreciated and he's paid. You had the Bengals put up great numbers with Joe Burrow, put up great numbers with Jamar Chase, and they still didn't make the playoffs.
You got a point.
And we're going to get into their
crazy good.
It was crazy good. And their defense let up. I mean, it literally reminded me of an early 2010s New Orleans Saints. It literally reminded me of that. Drew Brees playing his heart out, and his defense just doesn't show up. And that's what happened with Joe Burrow this season. We're going to get to now, the Cincinnati Bengals had the 17th pick, which is the first pick starting once we get into the rest of our mock draft. We will talk about why their defense was struggling, what they need to do to get better, and I'm foreshadowing what type of pick I'm going to have at 17. So pay attention. But you don't have the money to keep paying an offensive player.
No, you really don't.
You have to allocate money to the defense. If you are going to pay Tee Higgins what he's worth, and you think he's worth as a second string wide receiver, $20+ million, like Chris Godwin was when he signed his 3-year, $60 million deal. Because it's going to happen. He's going to ask for north of $20 million. It's going to happen, nothing less. You're not going to be able to compete if you don't prioritize in Cincinnati. What does Cincinnati have to do, Nate? Obviously, we talked about you can't re-sign Tee Higgins.
You can't.
Before we get into their pick, what does Cincinnati have to do to compete next season?
Shore up the line, fix that defense. They're going to have to shore up that line, fix up the defense. Most definitely, they got to fix the defense. And they're going to have to get some pieces. They got to just develop a running game. They have to develop a running game. Are real good, and they have to have a nice little running back, like 1-2 punch. But that
It,
defense has to get fixed. That defense has to get fixed. It was atrocious.
oh, I agree. That is priority number one. I would love you let Joe Mixon walk. You said, hey, there's a stigma in the NFL. Running backs aren't that great. We're done paying running backs. Nobody pays them anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You let Joe Mixon walk, and he has a great year on the Texans.
Yeah, he did.
And
He
then
had an amazing year.
great year. And then now you're struggling between Chase Brown and Zach Moss of who you're going to have. Chase Brown prevails. He might be okay in Cincinnati, but you don't have that guy in Joe Mixon. I agree, Nate, but they're going to need a good defensive player.